Okay, great. So now we have a cover for our ironing board. We've got the muslin cover patterned and cut out. So our next step is, on this board, I actually want to add more padding to the ironing board. What I liked about this board is it was cheap. It was literally $1 at the 99-cent store. Or 99 cents at the 99-cent store, and I bought it because it was the perfect size for my work area. But it has like very little padding. It's literally just fabric wrapped around a piece of particle board. So in order to make padding for this, there's a couple ways to go. I'm going to use the same method that I used to make the pattern for the cotton muslin. The material that I'm using to pad, it's a lightweight 100% cotton batting. So it has to be cotton. Cotton is really going to do a good job of retaining heat. It doesn't shrink. It's not synthetic, so it's not going to melt. That's what you want. If you can't find cotton batting, you can order it online at Amazon. If you go to quilting stores, they'll also have it in stock. It tends to not be carried by major retailers like Walmart or Target or places like that. It's kind of a specific thing. So definitely try to get your hands on some 100% cotton batting. Now, to mark this, instead of using a chalk pencil, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use actually a grease pencil. See how it has that little tail on there? Using a grease pencil is great when you need to mark on a cotton batting. The reason you use a grease pencil instead of a chalk pencil is the grease is going to do a better job of depositing color onto the all-natural cotton batting. A grease pencil, it's also called something like, they'll also call it things like a China marker, wax pencil, same thing. So I'm just going to go right around the perimeter of my ironing board. So I'm pretty happy with this. This is pretty awesome. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually extend, I'm going to create a seam allowance, and I'm going to then cut along the seam allowance. Now, when you're marking on this cotton batting, it can be really difficult to use the two, there's one method of adding your seam allowance, which is using a clear ruler and just marking along the edges. That's totally fine. It's a great way to go, but it can be kind of time consuming. And also, I don't need a super large seam allowance. The seam allowance I'm looking for is 5/8. It's not going to be nearly as large as the seam allowance on the cover. So if I want a 5/8 seam allowance, I'm going to teach you a trick. If you are in a country that happens to use inches and feet as the standard of measurement, if you find a tape measure, use your tape measure. Your tape measure is 5/8 of an inch wide. So, especially when you're measuring kind of a longer thing, you're going to align the edge of your tape measure with the edge of your lines of your pattern, and then you can just hold that down, just draw right along the line, and there's your 5/8 inch. So it's pretty straightforward, right? And here's the beautiful thing is as you get around corners, it's really, really easy for you to just manipulate your tape measure with your fingers. And just go around the corners there. Again, if you're like, whoa, I didn't know I could make seam allowance that way. There's actually another video, and I'll go ahead and put a link here, so you can take a look at other methods of creating seam allowances. You might find some of them are helpful for you. Okay? Alright, so I'm just going to go right around with your seam allowance. And then again here at the edge, add in my seam allowance here. And then I'm going to kind of freehand it around the corners. So really short corners. And then once again, when I get to the bottom, I'm going to lay out my tape measure. Hold my tape measure down with one hand and draw in my seam allowance with the other. Yep. And now that that is there, I'm going to take my scissors and just go ahead and cut out my batting. Alright, so now I've got my cotton batting cut out, and now you can see how it's all coming together. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with how this looks and feels right now. Alright, so now I've got the batting complete, and now I'm ready to take my pattern for the cover that goes over top and just double check everything's where I want it to be. I'm going to flip this over so you can see the pattern. Okay, there we go. And the reason you want to have a little bit of a seam allowance on there is so that here at the edges of your cover, you get a soft feel at the edge. Okay? And then when we put the elastic on it, everything's going to come together. So before you move on, just make sure that this is what you want. If you want more padding on top of your ironing board, then go ahead and just use a little bit more cotton batting. So I do actually want a little bit more padding to go on this ironing board. So since that's what I want, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my original piece as the pattern. And I think 2 layers will do it, but it depends on what you're doing as well. If you're doing embroidery, if you're making your own custom ironing pad for something like embroidery where you need something a little more squishy underneath your iron, feel free to add an extra layer for 3 layers of batting to do that. If you prefer a little bit less padding on your ironing board, you can stick with just 1 layer. That's totally fine. I find that 2 layers is enough to do most of what I need. I also have a special ironing board that I made just for doing things with like embroidery, and that has like 4 layers of padding. And the reason you have a little bit more padding for things with embroidery versus everything else is sometimes you just want to inject a lot of heat to hold your design in place. And when you do that, you also maybe don't want so crispy edges on the things that were ironed. So to overcome that, you just add a little bit more padding so that as you iron over your embroidery or your cross stitch, it actually sinks into the ironing board, so it stays, you still get a little bit more 3-dimension to it instead of everything getting flattened. So I'm pretty happy with this. Now I'm going to go ahead and cover my board again, just to kind of do a quick dry fit and see how I like it. And now that I feel what this is like, I really like the level of padding that I'm at. So now I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is attaching elastic around the edges of my ironing board cover.